Hello and welcome to the Headache Doctor podcast, where on this podcast, it's our mission to educate and empower everyone with headaches and migraines so that you can break free from a life of fear of your next headache or migraine and dependence on medication. This podcast is titled Diagnosed with Migraine, Now What? The whole point of this podcast is going to be talking about what leads to you receiving a migraine diagnosis and then what you do with it from there. You see, our healthcare system, medical doctors are trained to provide this diagnosis. They put a pretty bow on it. They did all the testing. They lead you in the direction of here's your diagnosis, but then it's the now what that sometimes it falls apart. And so we're going to pick up the pieces and put them together so that you understand what your diagnosis means and have actionable, practical steps in order to ask yourself the right questions so that you can help yourself actually at the source of the problem, rather than wandering through our healthcare system trying to figure out what makes sense for you. So before we jump into that, though, I want to talk about the SAM device. So if you do not live locally in Colorado Springs, in Parker, in Colorado in general, if you don't have access to our services here, and then if you are not ready to take the step to go through our virtual coaching, where we lay out this framework and we help you understand what it means to get out of headaches or migraines by self-care. We have the SAM device, which is available through Amazon. So you can go on Amazon, type in migraine relief device. We're on the first page, or the SAM device. Purchase that. It's at your house in 2 days. Amazon will ship it to you, free Prime shipping, and it's a device that we want you to start using to allow your neck to start moving the way that it should. You see a lot of these problems trace back to restrictions in the neck. I had a patient years ago that was trying to figure out how she could replicate what we do in clinic because she was traveling out of the country. And so I came up with the SAM device, and it's helped hundreds of people relieve their headaches or migraines. We get a lot of good feedback on whether people use it preventatively or actively when they start having a headache or migraine. Go ahead and order that. Let us know what you think. Reach out to us, especially if you start using it and you're like, I'm not sure if I'm doing this right. We are happy to help and support you on this journey. So that's another way you can interact with us and get started on this journey in a very practical way. So back to the podcast. So if you have received the diagnosis of a migraine, and that could be migraine with aura, migraine without aura, that could even be atypical migraine. There's all sorts of, there's different types or flavors of the migraine diagnosis. But one thing that is generally true is that your migraine diagnosis is based off a series of symptoms that you communicated to your provider. So there's not necessarily anything objective on testing that they're doing to provide you with the migraine diagnosis. So there's tests that they may do to rule certain things out, but they're not finding something, they're not ruling in the migraine diagnosis necessarily. They're just taking your symptoms, putting them into that diagnosis, and then giving it back to you. And so the migraine diagnosis is typically going to be provided if you have one-sided pounding, throbbing sensation. Typically, it's pretty debilitating, accompanied by nausea, light sound sensitivity, and maybe a visual disturbance or an aura. And so what's going on here is you received your diagnosis of migraine, and oftentimes people think, okay, I got my diagnosis, so this means that we understand the problem and now there's a path forward to fix it. And that is really where everything kind of falls apart, because if you had any hope or any sort of assurance that receiving the migraine diagnosis was going to get you where you needed to be to solve this problem, what people realize as they continue on their healthcare journey is that's not really what it means. What it does mean is that it allows you to start having prescription medications that maybe are specific to a migraine diagnosis. Maybe it's Botox, maybe it's the CGRPs, the latest and greatest types of drugs that are out there. And they may have an impact, as they've shown historically, and as they've been studied, those medications seem to have a more specific impact to those people that present with these symptoms, okay? But what we have to be careful of is framing our perception of what that migraine diagnosis actually means. So what our healthcare system will paint the picture of is that this is a neurological problem. Neurological in the sense that it's a spontaneous neurological event. So the nervous system is made up of our central nervous system, so brain, spinal cord, and then our peripheral nervous system, which are all the nerves that exit the spinal column and provide us with the ability to have sensation, hot, cold, vibration, different types of sensations run through our peripheral nerves, any type of sensation, allowing us to feel. And then we have motor nerves that allow us to move. They communicate with our muscles. And so all of this system is the network that allows us to perceive pain and have a sense of what's actually happening with our bodies and with what is around us. Okay? So saying it's a neurological problem is saying that system has an issue with it. Okay? So we do have other real neurological problems that exist where the nervous system itself has issues. But we have to ask ourselves, does it make sense for this to be a neurological problem in itself, meaning the source or the origin of those symptoms just come from that system. They're isolated into that system. Now, what we're going to talk about is how if we frame it from this is a neurological problem, really the type of treatments that we're looking at are going to be chemical-based, pharmaceutical-based, interacting with pain as it travels and transmits through that system. So we're looking at the system, we're seeing the system is basically on high alert. There's hypersensitivities, there's alarm bells going off. We have light, sound sensitivities. We've got a visual disturbance. We've got all these things that are just sort of random, don't really make sense, but they all sort of point back to the nervous system. And so that's how our healthcare system got to the point of saying this is a neurological problem. Now, the thing that they stop at is they say, okay, well, we haven't been able to figure out, that doesn't seem there's anything else wrong. These people are like relatively, normal, healthy, whatever it may be. I mean, there's a spectrum of people that are getting migraines. And so whether your health is otherwise unhealthy or you're otherwise healthy, anywhere on the spectrum, you can fall victim to having migraines. And so the problem itself in the minds of our healthcare professionals has been, okay, this is just a spontaneous neurological event. So there's nothing like triggering it, just sort of comes out of the blue, and now you have it. And the sad thing about this is the diagnosis sticks with you, and typically it's just sort of take the medication, manage the frequency, the intensity until potentially grow out of it in, your late 50s, 60s, something like that. Okay. So, is it a neurological problem? We have to acknowledge, and this is something that people will say on the internet about what we're doing or about this podcast. Headaches and migraines aren't that simple. Migraines aren't that simple. They're really complicated. And how can you simplify it to just being a neck issue? Okay, so yes, they are complicated. The experience that someone has when they have a migraine is complicated. It's confusing. The pain's in your head. It's stabbing behind your eye. It's a band-like presentation in your forehead. It's this really achy, deep, like pain at the back of the head that wraps up and around. And then you get light sensitivity, sound sensitivity, nausea accompanied with it. You lose vision in one eye or both eyes. And so there's all these like crazy things that are happening, and it's so debilitating. And you go through our healthcare system and nothing seems to help. And so, yeah, it makes sense to say they're complicated. And I absolutely agree. They're complicated. They're tough. They're tough to treat. Even when we understand what's actually at the crux and at the source of the problem, like it doesn't make it easy to go through the process. But what I'd like to do is take a stab at simplifying it. Okay. So when we say complicated, complicated can mean that, okay, everyone has a different experience. And so we don't want to oversimplify it in the sense of saying like, well, everyone has the same migraine experience. Everyone has right-sided and it wraps up and around. They have a stabbing pain behind the eye, and then they get light and sound sensitive. That's a common presentation, but that's not everyone. So there's a lot of people that have a variety of different symptoms, and the intensity of those symptoms will vary. And the presentation of their pain, the location of their pain, it varies. I've been doing this as a specialist for 6+ years, and I don't think I've met two people that have the exact same presentation. And so everyone is unique in how these symptoms present, which makes it more complicated. It's not like everyone comes in with like knee pain in the front of their knee when running. That's a common pattern with knee pain, but the experience that people have here, there's a wide variety of experiences. And so it can be more complicated in how it presents. Complicated because it can also be complicated because our healthcare system doesn't necessarily provide an answer. And so it feels like I have a problem that's like unsolvable. I have a problem that these smart doctors, and they're very intelligent, when they're evaluating me and trying to treat these symptoms, like we're not having much success. And so that's discouraging. And so how could you say like, this is so simple, it's just a neck thing? Again, I want to acknowledge like this, it's very complicated. And the fact that our healthcare system struggles to find answers to this, that can be defeating and it can feel discouraging. So yeah, very complicated in that sense. Complicated because you haven't found relief and you've tried everything. A lot of people we work with have tried traditional, alternative, acupuncture, chiropractic, massage. They've tried diet changes. They've worked with functional medicine doctors. Whatever it is for you, you've tried it, and you feel like you've tried everything. And so again, complicated in this sense. It would be wrong to say like, oh, this is just simple and straightforward. No, it has been very complicated for everyone we see. They've gone on this journey, and it has definitely not felt like easy to understand. And then also complicated because people are looking for some sort of pattern or some sort of trigger, something that provides relief from the thing, and they can't find it. There's all sorts of things that might provide a little bit of relief or irritation, and sometimes those things are beneficial or irritating, and sometimes they're not, and so it's not consistent, and these patterns are confusing. And sometimes it's different for one person compared to the other, and so what one person tries might not work for the next. And so what I want to do here is understand, one, how we got to the point of these things being true, where you've gone through a healthcare system, you've tried all the things, and nothing's really seemed to help. And then how do we understand this? How do we make it less scary? How do we make it less complicated in our mind? Because that's going to be helpful. That's actually going to put us in a situation where if we can break it down and then take bite-sized chunks of this so that we are just moving in the direction of overall health, asking the right questions so that we don't burden ourselves with added anxiety of sort of evaluating the situation wrong, so that when we trial different types of treatments, we're expecting something that's too much. And we're sort of working in this lens of, this should fix my problem. And when it doesn't, we just feel so defeated. And so what I want to do is reframe how we're looking at this diagnosis of migraine so that we can ask the right questions and then move forward in a way that's going to be healthier. Okay, so how did we get here? We got here because we have looked at this problem as a chemical neurological problem. We've looked at it through this lens. And what we have to understand is that there are two different mechanisms at play here, okay? So one of those mechanisms is the neurological response, okay? So if you've listened to this podcast and you've heard me talk about the neck, and you're like, well, how could you say like this isn't a neurological problem? Well, it is a neurological problem, but it's not a neurological problem that comes out of nothing. It's a neurological problem that stems from a source. There's a source. And so we can't neglect to understand where the source of this pain signal is coming from, okay? We have to make sure that we've evaluated all of the potential sources of pain for the person that's dealing with head or facial symptoms, okay? And then we also have to understand that how we perceive pain and the neurological system that our healthcare system tries so hard to manipulate and drown out or change that pain signal itself through the pharmaceuticals, we have to understand that that system itself is impacted in a negative way when someone has migraines. And we know that because it's not just pain in your neck that you experience. A lot of people do experience pain in the neck. It's actually one of the most common symptoms associated with migraine. But it's something where the neck could be the actual source of the pain itself, and then as it travels, transmits that pain signal through the nervous system, through our spinal column, through the brainstem, and then ultimately to the brain when we perceive and interpret what's happening. That pathway is impacted as well. So we have two things. We have the pain signal, the source of the pain signal, and then we have how the pain signal is received, okay? And then it's complicated because we've got light and sound sensitivities, we've got visual disturbance, we've got nausea, we've got all these different things, even like paralysis or one-sided numbness, facial weakness, like things like this that feel like stroke-like symptoms. Essentially what's happening is our brain is getting a really noisy pain signal, a really irritated, like alarm bells going off pain signal. And then it interprets that as like, wow, there's something really wrong. And there's these hypersensitivities over time as the brain is trying to shut off and ignore that pain signal. Sometimes it can't. And it's so loud and annoying that it pulls in all these other sensory inputs. That central sensitization, that hypersensitivity of all these other pathways is well documented. And it's something that will be used to be explained for, in our healthcare system as to like, why am I having all these symptoms? That's what will be explained. But what's missing is the why is that triggered in the first place. Okay. So we're working within the same lens, all the same studies, all the same research as what our healthcare system is using to guide their interpretation of what's happening. They're intervening at the nervous system level where we're saying, no, the nervous system is just transmitting. It's just carrying the signal and having a hypersensitive response to it. It's carrying the signal, but the problem itself, the signal itself is being sent from somewhere else. Okay. Okay. So neck pain is one of the most common symptoms associated with migraines. Botox is one of the most impactful treatments for migraines. And so our healthcare system itself is acknowledging, yeah, the neck is playing a role in this. They would just say that the neck is just one of these things that's hypersensitive, not like the actual source. And my last podcast, I talked about how the neck is the problem and why it's overlooked. And so listen to that if you're like, okay, well, why are we missing this? Okay, so I'm not going to go into that too much here, but how do we understand this scenario and how do we make it less scary? Okay, so we start by reframing the way we think about it. All right, so instead of assuming that this is a chemical, spontaneous neurological response, we should rather assume that we missed something. Okay, now the reason I'm saying that is because just from a practical perspective on like how should we go through life? Should we assume the worst or the best? I'm more of an optimist, but if you are stuck in this scenario, what we want is to assume that something was missed because we want there to be something objective that we can treat. Okay, and so when we're assuming something's missed, we have to ask the question like, what can cause head or facial pain? When we ask that question, what we know from anatomy, physiology, from research that looks at sensitizing the upper part of the neck with different types of salines or stimulants that reproduce a pain signal, it refers into the head. It refers into the eye. So the upper part of the neck refers pain in this same pattern. Okay. So then we have to ask, have the neck, the jaw, the shoulders, have these areas properly been evaluated and screened? Well, that's where we run into issues in our healthcare system. We use a lot of still images. We use x-rays, MRI, CTs, and they don't show movement. And so basically what we're discovering here at Novera is there's an overlooked movement problem that we're catching and we're able to treat. So it's a loud, noisy upper neck that's sending the pain signal. That signal itself is being interpreted as like, wow, all this stuff is in chaos. And so we calm down the initial response and we get relief. That's our whole product. That's what we do. Okay. So we asked, did we evaluate those things properly? And I would say most of the time, if not every time, the answer is going to be no. And so we need to continue on this journey to improve the things that we know can be causing head or facial pain. All right. Now, if you are listening to this, like I don't want you to think, well, I've seen multiple providers for my neck, or I've gotten on this road of my neck, or I saw a physical therapist. One of the bigger issues is that our healthcare system in general struggles to have providers that specialize, that see this all the time, and so that's our role. That's why we want to come alongside you. But there are a lot of things that you can do on your own. That's why this podcast exists. We've got reviews on this podcast for people that say they've helped themselves tremendously just by listening to this podcast every week. Okay, so what's a better mindset? All right. What we want to do is we want to move forward into moving into our general improvement of health. We want to look at what's true, okay? So like we just talked about, understanding that, okay, we don't necessarily need to trust that my diagnosis is the thing because it was just symptoms. There was nothing objective. And then when we look at how we got to this diagnosis and the treatments that are provided, it's interacting with the nervous system. So it's not interacting with anything that would objectively be causing a problem in the first place. And then we say, okay, well, what could cause a problem that leads us to the neck? All right. So we have the neck, we have the jaw, we have the shoulders. And so if we start asking ourselves these questions and then we say, okay, like now I have something objective that I can cling on to and take steps in the right direction. Now, one of the things that people have a hard time with is framing their evaluation of different treatments as they go through our healthcare system in the proper lens. All right. So one of the big questions that I would say when you have this diagnosis of migraine, you should ask yourself is, okay, do I trust the diagnosis only leads to medication and that's the only avenue I can go on? Or am I going to try to take steps to improve my overall health? Now, if you think of different scenarios, let's say you're at the dental office, or maybe you're tragically diagnosed with like a type of cancer or something like that, or whatever condition you think of, like would you go to your provider and say, I need a treatment that allows this to go away completely and never come back, and if it doesn't do that, I'm going to question if this is the solution or not? I would argue no. We don't evaluate things that way very often, okay? And so, but what we hear with people that have migraines is they'll try a treatment, it might help a little bit, but then it'll come back and it's like, well, that didn't really work, all right? Now, we have to pay attention to anything that changes your symptoms, even if it's in the wrong direction, but especially if it's in the right direction. And we have to put those things in one of two categories. So one category is it manipulating the nervous system and the signal that the pathway that the signal is being sent on, or is it impacting the actual thing that can be sending the pain, okay? And then we also have to ask, is this something that's natural and healthy to improve this system in my body so that it can better respond to the problem? Or is it helping the problem itself? Or is this just masking the symptoms, okay? So that's where medication is oftentimes going to fall into the masking. Botox is going to fall into it is shutting off, but it's not improving the overall condition of the neck itself. And so I would say most things, if not everything that the medical system has to offer is either shutting off, masking, or not correcting the problem, but just alluding to an issue like Botox, kind of shutting off paralyzing muscle tissue. It's showing us there is a neck issue, but it's not restoring the proper function, okay? And so if we're in the neurological camp, if we're working on something that seems to be impacting our threshold for tolerating pain, natural ways to do that might be working with a functional medicine doctor, or improving your gut health, or avoiding certain foods that are inflammatory, because those things are going to negatively impact the body, which means you can't tolerate the pain as well. Or maybe it's stress levels or hormones are imbalanced, and then every month you're getting a wicked migraine because your estrogen levels are kind of fluctuating dramatically. So those things are things that need to be considered because they impact your threshold. They impact the body's ability to tolerate that signal being transmitted to the brain, okay? And then on the other side of things, we have things that impact the physical body. So things that impact your neck or shoulders, the amount of tension you're carrying, how you slept the night before, if you're sleeping on your stomach, how much exercise and mobility you give yourself throughout the day. And if we have a largely sedentary lifestyle, if we're looking at a computer all the time, and if we're not doing things that are healthy for our neck, it's no wonder that we are sort of stuck in this cycle of having headaches or migraines or this bad neck issue. And so all of these things play into it, and there's dozens of different scenarios that someone might put themselves in on a daily basis, and they're trying to figure out, like, what's the one thing that's the problem. And the assumption is that we think that we're otherwise healthy and we just have one thing that is an issue that's causing all of these problems. And in reality, there oftentimes can be, a really bad neck issue that's causing a lot of the problem and someone's otherwise healthy. But most of the time, it's a combination of things. And that's why people get so confused and caught up in like, well, I tried that and it didn't work, and I tried this and it didn't work. Instead of trying things and evaluating them based on if they worked or not, if you had some sense of relief and it falls outside the category of like artificially shutting off or masking symptoms, and it is pushing us in the direction of like helping the body physically. So that could be like chiropractic, massage, or just exercising regularly, obviously seeing a physical therapist, working with us. Those things can provide relief and are helping the body physically, giving you an insight of like, hey, there's something good here. And then on the other end, you have, okay, like I don't want to be relying on medication, so I'm going to try to reduce the level of inflammation through my body, balance my hormones, things that improve your threshold, okay? And then we want to move forward on those things that are healthier for our bodies, restoring our bodies to what they should naturally be able to do and function. And so that's, if we zoom out in our process and we get less granular and we say, okay, like, yes, C1 and C2 and the upper part of the neck is stiff and it's restricted and it needs to move and we need to physically work on those. If we zoom out and just put it into perspective, what you're dealing with this migraine diagnosis, and then we start to think and act differently and move forward and reframe it, it can be really helpful for someone struggling with a migraine, okay? And then just know that it's a journey, okay? So it can feel really defeating and it can feel like you're beat up and nothing helps and you're just sort of stuck in a rut. And we work with people all the time that feel that way. And so what I would encourage you to do is just stick with it. Stick with the framework and what you know is healthy and moving in the right direction. And then, of course, reach out to us so we can help you out. Order the SAM device on Amazon. Give it a shot. See how it works for you and let us know. Thank you guys so much for listening to the Headache Doctor podcast. As always, it's our mission on this podcast to educate and empower everyone with headaches and migraines so that you can break free from a life of fear of your next headache or migraine and dependence on medication. I'll see you next week.